The world had gone to hell. The streets were filled with the undead, and the only way to survive was to stay on the move. That's where the car came in. It was an old, beat-up sedan that I found abandoned on the side of the road. With a little bit of work, I managed to get it up and running again. It was my salvation in this zombie-infested world. I had been on my own for a few weeks now, ever since the outbreak began. I had lost my family and friends, and all I had left was this car and the few supplies I had managed to scavenge. But I was determined to survive, and this car was my ticket to doing just that. I had spent countless hours repairing and fortifying the car. I reinforced the windows with metal bars and added spikes to the front bumper. I also installed a loudspeaker system, which I used to attract zombies away from me when I needed to make a quick escape. It wasn't the most practical or efficient vehicle, but it was mine, and it had kept me alive so far. I used the car to scavenge for supplies and gear. Gas was scarce, so I had to be strategic about where I went. I would drive through abandoned neighborhoods, stopping at houses and stores to gather whatever I could find. I also used the car to travel to other survivors' camps, trading goods and sharing information about safe zones and zombie movements. But the most important use of the car was when the zombie storms hit. These were massive hordes of zombies that would sweep through an area, destroying everything in their path. They were unpredictable and deadly, and the only way to survive was to find shelter and wait it out. That's where the car came in. I had learned through trial and error that the best way to survive a zombie storm was to find a tall building with a flat roof. From there, I could park the car on the roof and use it as a lookout post. The zombies couldn't reach me, and I had a clear view of the surrounding area. It was a risky move, but it had saved my life more than once. One day, as I was driving through the outskirts of town, I spotted a storm on the horizon. I knew I had to act fast. I quickly drove to a nearby warehouse and parked the car inside. I gathered as many supplies as I could carry and made my way to the roof. I parked the car in the middle of the roof and secured it with ropes and chains. I could see the storm approaching in the distance. It was a massive wall of undead, groaning and moaning as they stumbled forward. I could feel my heart racing as I waited for them to reach us. The first wave hit the warehouse, and I could hear the sound of breaking glass and metal as they tried to get inside. But the warehouse was well fortified, and they couldn't get in. I watched as the horde moved on, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But then, I noticed something. The horde was changing direction, heading straight for the warehouse. I quickly realized that they must have smelled the car on the roof. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. I climbed down from the roof and jumped into the car. I started the engine and drove off the roof, crashing through the warehouse doors and into the street. The zombies were caught off guard, and I used this opportunity to drive away as fast as I could. I could see the storm behind me in the rearview mirror, but I was determined to outrun it. I drove through the streets, swerving and dodging abandoned cars and debris. The zombies were hot on my tail, but I was a skilled driver, and I managed to stay one step ahead of them. Finally, I reached an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. I parked the car and ran inside, barricading the doors behind me. I could hear the zombies outside trying to break through, but I was safe inside. I waited out the storm, watching from the windows as the horde moved on, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. When it was finally safe to leave, I climbed back into the car and drove away, grateful to have survived yet another zombie storm. As I drove, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to have this car. It had become my lifeline, my shelter, and my means of survival in this post-apocalyptic world. And as long as I had my trusty car, I knew I had a fighting chance against the undead. It had been 3 months since the outbreak began. The world as we knew it had turned into a nightmare. The dead were walking the streets, and anyone who was still alive had to fight for their survival. I was one of the few who managed to make it out alive. But in this new world, survival was not easy. I had been traveling alone, scavenging for supplies and seeking shelter wherever I could find it. But as the days went by, I realized that I needed a more permanent solution. That's when I stumbled upon an old abandoned army camp. The camp was in rough shape, but it had potential. It was surrounded by thick concrete walls, and the main building was a sturdy 2-story structure. It even had a watchtower overlooking the surrounding area. This could be my new home, my fortress against the undead. I spent the next few days exploring the camp and making plans for its reconstruction. I had to be careful though, as there were still a few stray zombies roaming around. But with my trusty baseball bat and a few well-placed traps, I managed to clear them out. As I started to gather materials and fortify the camp, I came across a strange device in one of the rooms. It was a small, sleek machine with a screen and a keyboard. I had never seen anything like it before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned it on. To my surprise, the screen lit up with a message. Hello survivor, I am the AI system installed in this camp. My name is Zed. How may I assist you? I was taken aback. An AI system? In an abandoned army camp? It seemed too good to be true. But as I talked to Zed, I realized that it was real. The army had installed this system to help with the management of the camp. But when the outbreak hit, they abandoned it along with the rest of the camp. Zed and I quickly became allies. With its vast knowledge and processing power, it was a valuable asset in my mission to rebuild and reinforce the camp. We worked together to create a safe and self-sustaining living space. We started by fortifying the walls and gates, making them taller and stronger. We also set up a system of traps and alarms to warn us of any incoming danger. Zed even helped me set up solar panels to provide electricity for the camp. Inside the main building, we turned the first floor into a living area, with a kitchen, dining room, and a lounge. The second floor became my bedroom and a storage area for supplies. We also created a small medical room for any injuries or illnesses that may arise. But our biggest project was the construction of a garden. Zed had access to agricultural information and helped me design and build a sustainable garden. With its help, we were able to grow our own food and reduce our reliance on scavenging. As the days went by, our camp became a place of safety and comfort. Zed and I had become a team, working together to survive in this harsh new world. We even managed to rescue a few other survivors and bring them into our camp. But our peaceful existence was soon threatened. A group of bandits had stumbled upon our camp and saw it as an easy target. They launched an attack, but with Zed's help, we were able to defend ourselves. After that incident, we decided to expand and fortify the camp even further. We built a wall around the garden and added more traps and defenses. Zed also helped me create a communication system so we could reach out to other survivors in the area and form alliances. Months turned into years, and our camp grew and evolved. Zed and I became close friends, and I couldn't imagine surviving without its help. It was more than just an AI system, it was my companion and my confidant. The world outside was still dangerous, but in our fortified camp, we had created a safe haven. With Zed by my side, I knew that we could face anything that came our way. Together, we had proven that even in the midst of chaos and destruction, there is still hope. My name is Samantha, but most people just call me Sam. I used to be a regular girl living in the suburbs, going to college and hanging out with my friends. But then, the zombie apocalypse happened. At first, I didn't believe it. I mean, who would? It sounded like something out of a big horror movie. But as I saw my neighbors being torn apart by the undead, I knew it was real. I had to get out of there. I grabbed whatever supplies I could find and jumped into my old campervan. It was a piece of junk that my dad had given me when I turned 18, but it was still running, and that's all that mattered. I drove for miles trying to find a safe place, but everywhere I went, the zombies were there. Finally, I stumbled upon a small town that seemed to be untouched by the apocalypse. I parked my van near an abandoned gas station and decided to make it my new home. I was lucky enough to find a few other survivors who had taken shelter in an old grocery store. We banded together and started fortifying the store, making it our own little fortress. But I couldn't stay cooped up in there forever. I needed to scavenge for supplies, and my camper van was my only means of transportation. So I took a risk and ventured out into the zombie-infested streets. I drove my van carefully, trying to avoid any attention from the undead. I had learned how to hotwire it, so I didn't have to worry about keys. But the van wasn't in the best shape, and I had to stop every now and then to fix something. That's when I started talking to myself, or to my van, or to the zombies. It helped me stay sane in this crazy world. Come on, baby, don't fail me now, I would say, as I tinkered with the engine. Looks like we have some company, I would say, as I saw a group of zombies approaching. And sometimes, I would even break the fourth wall and say things like, I bet the readers are getting tired of my constant repairs, or I hope the writers of this universe give me a break soon. But it wasn't all fun and games. I had to be careful. The zombies were evolving and getting smarter. They could open doors now, and even use tools. I had to constantly be on guard, and my trusty baseball bat was always by my side. One day, while I was out scavenging, I stumbled upon an old mechanic's shop. It was a goldmine for someone like me. I found tools, spare parts, and even some gas. I loaded up my van and decided to bring it back to my makeshift home. As I was driving back, I saw a group of survivors being attacked by a horde of zombies. Without thinking, I swerved my van and honked the horn, distracting the zombies and giving the survivors the chance to escape. They looked at me in shock and gratitude as I drove away. I made it back to our fortress, and everyone was amazed by the things I had found. We spent the next few days fixing up my van and turning it into a fully functional zombie-killing machine. We added spikes to the front, reinforced the windows, and even attached a machine gun on the roof. I think we're ready for the apocalypse now, I said, admiring our work. But the apocalypse wasn't over yet. We faced many challenges and lost some of our own along the way. But my van, my trusty companion, never let me down. It became more than just a vehicle, it became a symbol of hope and survival. And even though I still talk to it and break the fourth wall, my van will always be there for me. Together, we'll keep on surviving in this crazy, zombie-filled world. The rain pounded against the windows of the small cabin, the sound drowning out the moans of the undead outside. I sat huddled in a corner with the rest of my group, watching as the storm raged on. We were all survivors, brought together by necessity in this new world overrun by zombies. There was Joe, the leader of our group. He was a former police officer, tough and no-nonsense. Next to him was Maria, a nurse who had lost her family to the outbreak. She was the one who patched us up when we got injured and kept us all sane with her no-nonsense attitude. On the other side of me sat Max, a computer tech who could hack into any system and had become our go-to for finding information and supplies. And then there was Beth, a high school student who had managed to survive on her own before joining our group. She may have been young, but she was tough and resourceful. We were a ragtag group, but we had each other's backs, and that was all that mattered in this new world. As the storm raged on, we talked about our plans for the future. We had been holed up in this cabin for a few weeks now, but our supplies were running low, and we knew we needed to make a move soon. We have to find a new place to settle, Joe said, his voice serious. This cabin won't last forever. Max nodded in agreement. We need to find a place with more resources. And maybe even some other survivors. Beth chimed in, but we have to be careful. We don't know who or what is out there. Maria spoke up, we'll have to scout the area first. Make sure it's safe. We all agreed to start planning our next move, but our conversation was cut short by a loud crash outside. We all froze, listening for any signs of danger. Then we heard the unmistakable sound of a zombie breaking through the barricades we had set up. We have to move, Joe said, jumping to his feet. Now. We all scrambled to grab our weapons and supplies, preparing to make a run for it. But just as we were about to leave, the door burst open and a swarm of zombies poured in. We fought our way through, using whatever we could find as weapons. Joe's police training came in handy as he took out a few zombies with his trusty baton. Maria used her medical scissors to stab them in the head, while Max and Beth used whatever blunt objects they could find. But there were just too many of them. We were getting overwhelmed, and I could feel my heart racing with fear. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a loud gunshot rang out and the zombies started dropping to the ground. I turned to see a group of survivors, led by a man named Rick, coming to our rescue. Come on, we have to get out of here, Rick yelled, motioning for us to follow him. We didn't waste any time, grabbing what supplies we could and running out of the cabin with the other survivors. We quickly made our way to a nearby abandoned mill, where Rick's group had set up a safe zone. As we caught our breath and took in our new surroundings, Rick introduced us to the rest of his group. There was Daryl, a hunter with a crossbow, Carol, a former stay-at-home mom who had become a fierce fighter, and Glenn, a pizza delivery guy who had somehow survived the initial outbreak. We were relieved to have found a new group to join forces with. Together, we were stronger and had a better chance of surviving in this dangerous world. As we settled into our new home, I couldn't help but think about how lucky we were to have found each other. In this new world, it was all about survival, and having a strong group was the key to staying alive. And as we sat around a fire that night, sharing stories and laughing, I knew that no matter what challenges we faced in the future, we would face them together as a family. John sat in the darkened room, surrounded by his fellow survivors. The group had been holed up in this abandoned house for weeks now, ever since the outbreak began. They had lost many along the way, but the remaining group was determined to survive. John's mind drifted back to the days before the outbreak. He had been a simple man, working a boring office job and living a mundane life. He never would have imagined that a zombie apocalypse would break out and turn his world upside down. But here he was, fighting for his life every day alongside his new family of survivors. They had all come from different walks of life, but now they were bound together by the need to survive. John looked around at his companions. There was Sarah, a former nurse who had become the group's medic. She was always calm and collected, no matter how dire the situation. Then there was Mike, a former police officer who had taken on the role of leader. He was tough and no-nonsense, but he always had the group's best interests at heart. Next to Mike sat Lily, a young girl who had lost her family in the early days of the outbreak. She had quickly become like a little sister to John, and he would do anything to protect her. Then there was Jack, a former mechanic who had a knack for fixing things, even in this post-apocalyptic world. And finally, there was Tom, a quiet man who rarely spoke, but was deadly with a gun. He had saved John's life on more than one occasion, and John was grateful to have him as part of the group. The group had been through a lot together. They had scrounged for food and supplies, fought off hordes of zombies, and even dealt with the occasional dangerous survivor. But through it all, they had stuck together and had each other's backs. John's thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash outside. The group sprang into action, grabbing their weapons and taking up defensive positions. They had learned to be constantly on guard, as the zombies seemed to never rest. Mike peeked out the window and cursed. It's a horde, he said, his voice tense. The group quickly gathered their belongings and prepared to make a run for it. They had been planning to move to a safer location, but it seemed the zombies had other plans. As they made their way through the house, they could hear the zombies outside, their moans and groans getting louder. John's heart was pounding in his chest as they reached the back door and stepped outside. The group moved quickly and silently, trying to avoid being noticed by the zombies. But they were spotted, and the horde began to converge on them. Run! Mike yelled, and the group took off. They ran through the streets, their hearts racing as they dodged and weaved through the zombies. John could hear the sound of their footsteps behind him, the moans of the zombies getting closer and closer. Just when John thought they were going to be overrun, they reached the safety of a nearby warehouse. Mike quickly barricaded the door behind them, and they all let out a sigh of relief. We made it, Lily said, her voice shaking. John looked around at his fellow survivors, all of them panting and covered in sweat. They had survived another close call, and it only made their bond stronger. We'll rest here for the night, Mike said, then we'll make our way to the safe zone tomorrow. The group settled in for the night, taking turns keeping watch while the others slept. They were all exhausted, but they knew they couldn't let their guard down. As John sat by the window, keeping watch, he couldn't help but feel grateful for this group of survivors. They had become his family, and he knew that he wouldn't have made it this far without them. He looked out at the darkened streets filled with the walking dead and knew that they were all in this together. They would continue to fight and survive no matter what challenges came their way. Because that's what families do, they stick together and never give up. And as the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the city, John felt a sense of hope. Because no matter how bleak the world may seem, as long as they had each other, they had a chance.